Okay, let's talk proofs. Now, I don't know that we've spent a lot of time on proofs, but basically all this is using the rules to justify what we're doing. So if two angles are congruent, we state why. Did we get that from corresponding angles? Do we get that from alternate interior angles? Are they alternate exterior angles? Or if two angles add together and equal 180, is it because they're consecutive interior angles? Okay, we're just going to justify our reasoning for things being congruent. Now, with that, also the converse is true. So we can prove that two angles are congruent because of parallel lines. We have these rules. Now, we can also, on the converse, prove that two lines are parallel if corresponding angles, if we know that those are congruent first, then we can say the two lines are parallel. If we know that alternate interior angles are congruent, we've shown them congruent some other way, then we can say the two lines are parallel. Same thing with alternate exterior, or if the consecutive interior angles are supplementary, we've shown that some other way, then the lines are parallel. Okay, so we're going to use these rules to justify, given some information, and justify or find a certain piece of information. So what this is called, it's a proof. Okay, so what we do is we take the information, okay, and first of all, let's zoom in here. First of all, we write down what's given. So given, we have this line is parallel to this line. So that means over here in the figure, we can go ahead and mark that CD is parallel to AB. Okay, that opens up a lot as far as, angle relationship. So let's go back to what else is given. It says that angle 2 is congruent to angle 1. So both of those have the same reason. They are given. Okay? You can draw a line if you want, I don't know, and just going on to the next statement. So what do we know from this? Okay, we want to get to our last statement, which needs to be angle 2 is congruent to angle 3. So that's going to be our last statement. So we've got to show how can we use what information was given to us and get to here. I'm looking at the figure. So if 1 and 2 are the same, I'm going to go ahead and mark those. Okay, if 1 and 2 are the same, what do we know? Well, we have parallel lines. So that was given to us, we need to use it. So if I'm given parallel lines, then let's see, what's true? Well, what do I have? I have alternate interior angles here. So angle 3 is congruent to angle 1. So I'm going to write that down. Angle 3 is congruent to angle 1. And the reason is I already had parallel lines, so the reason is they were alternate interior angles. Okay? All right, so now, what can I say? Well, what do I have? I have angle 2 congruent to angle 1. I have angle 3 congruent to angle 1. I need angle 2 congruent to angle 3. Well, that's true now. This property that says if I have two things congruent to the same thing, like angle 2 is congruent to angle 1, well, also angle 3 is congruent to angle 1. So angle 2 and angle 3 are both congruent to the same thing. So that property is called transitive. And so I'll say, okay, these little 3 dots mean, okay, therefore I'm done. I have a reason that this is true. So that proof is done. And let's see, what else we got here? The next one. I'm given, let's see, I want to prove that the two lines are parallel. So I don't know that they're parallel. I can't assume that they're parallel. I'm trying to prove that. What I do know is that angle 2 and angle 3 add together and equal 180, and angle 2 and angle 5 are supplementary. Okay, so let's write down the given. Measure of angle 2 plus the measure of angle 3 equals 180. Angle 2 and angle 5 are supplementary. So both of those are given. Okay, well, if they add together and equal 180, they're supplementary. So I have to state that angle 2 and angle 3 are supplementary. It's because I know the rule of being supplementary is that they add together and equal 180. So this is the definition of supplementary. All right. Now what do we have? I have angle 2 supplementary to both of these two angles. So what does that mean? If angle 5 is supplementary to angle 2 and angle 3 is supplementary to angle 2, those two have to be the same. Like for example, if angle 2 was, if that were 10 degrees, this would be 170, and so this would have to be 170. So these two are congruent. And the reason is they are congruent supplements. They're congruent, so they are supplementary to the same angle, so they have to be congruent. So let's see, what do we have? I have angle 3 congruent to angle 5. Those are alternate interior angles. So now I've shown that the alternate interior angles are congruent, so therefore those lines have to be parallel. So now I can say, therefore, the lines are parallel because the two angles I just showed are congruent, and they are alternate interior angles. So this is actually using the converse to state those are parallel. Okay. Now, these next on your practice, okay? The very last page, if you have my packet, the very last page has, you only need half of these. So there's like 40 statements here, or sorry, yes, reasons. Okay, there's 40 reasons. So those can kind of be like number 1 is given, right? And number 3, like number 1 is given here, and number 3 is given. So you could scratch off 2 givens and write them in here. So it's kind of like a matching thing. And then whatever statement you would use, or that reason, you know, is going to be one of these. Okay, and you only need half of them. Because normally I would have made these copies and then cut them in half and then handed them out to everyone. But in this case, I just put it in the packet. All right, so for example, number 1 is given. So I'm going to go and scratch off a given. Number 3 is given. So I do all the givens first. Given. Okay. All right, so now it's given that J is parallel to K. So I want to mark it on my figure. And then K is parallel to L. So, all right, so these two are parallel, these two are parallel. So essentially we could say they're all 3 parallel to each other, but it's not necessarily in the proof here. So let's see, it says angle 1 is congruent to angle 2. So why is angle 1 congruent to angle 2? Well, I look at where 1 sits and where 2 sits, those are corresponding angles. These two lines are already told us that they're parallel, so then those two would be congruent because they are corresponding. So I'm going to go find corresponding angles over here. Oh, here it is. I'll just scratch off one of the corresponding angles and write it in. Corresponding angles are congruent. Okay? Then let's see. We have now 2 congruent to 3. Oh, 2 is congruent to 3 because these two lines are parallel, so 2 would be congruent to 3. So 2 and 3 are congruent. Okay? So those would be the same. So those are corresponding angles. So I'm going to go scratch off another corresponding angles. Okay, because I already knew the lines are parallel. And then the last statement is what is to be proved. So now I can say that angle 1 is congruent to angle 3. So I'm going to say, okay, therefore, I'm done here. Angle 1 is congruent to angle 3. Why is angle 1 congruent to angle 3? Well, 1 is congruent to 2, and 2 is congruent to 3. So transitive would say that angle 1 is congruent to angle 3. Okay? So where's the transitive? Here we go. Pick a transitive. All right, so that's how those work. So those go through page 12. Okay, now let's go to page 13. We'll do a couple of these. Let's see, so I'm going to fill in the given. P is parallel to T, and Q is parallel to R. Those both are given. Now I'm going to go to the figure and write it in. Where's P is parallel to T, and Q is parallel to R. So Q and R, P and T. Okay. We want to prove that angle 1 and angle 3 are congruent. All right. Well, let's start naming some things that we know from the given information. So, for example, if P is parallel to T, here's a transversal. Let's see, 1 and 2 would be alternate exterior, so let's just say that. Angle 1 is congruent to angle 2 because they are alternate exterior angles, and alternate exterior angles are congruent. All right, 1 and 2, parallel lines, there's the transversal. Okay, 1 and 2. What else do we know? Well, if we want to get 1 congruent to 3, maybe, what's 2 congruent? If 2 is congruent to 3, we can transitive. So let's see what we have. Can 2 and 3 be congruent? Yeah, parallel lines. Let's see, parallel lines. Here's a transversal. So 2 and 3 would be corresponding. Oh, oops. Okay. Let's see, so angle 2 would be congruent to angle 3 because they are corresponding. Now, therefore, we are now done. Angle 1 is congruent to angle 3 because from our previous statements, 2 is congruent to both 1 and 3. So 1 and 3 have to be the same. That is transitive. All right, let's go to the next one. We're given that G, let's write it in, G is parallel to H. So let's mark it. G and H. And angle 1 is congruent to angle 2, it says here. So let's write that down too. Angle 1 is congruent to angle 2. So that's all given. Okay. What do we know? Well, let's see. Parallel lines, transversal. Let's see. We want to prove that P is parallel to R. So if we could show that, let's see. If we could show that 2 is congruent to 3, then those would be alternate exterior angles with P and R on this transversal. Okay, so we could get 3 congruent to 1, parallel lines cut by a transversal. 3 is congruent to 1 because they're corresponding. So we're going to say that angle 1 is congruent to angle 3. corresponding angles are congruent. Okay, so I'm going to mark that the same because 3 is congruent to 1 has the same mark. Now, by way of transitive, 2 is congruent to 3. Okay, 2 is congruent to 3 by way of transitive law, because we had previously stated 1's congruent to 2 and 1's congruent to 3. So now 2's congruent to 3, transitive. All right, now, since we know that 2 and 3 are congruent, these two lines have to be parallel because their alternate exterior angles are congruent. So that would be our final statement, that P is parallel to R. Okay, that's what we're trying to prove, and the reason we just barely stated those two angles, which are alternate exterior angles. I guess it's the converse we're going to use. But because they're alternate exterior angles, then that's why those two lines are parallel. Let's see. All right, well, I'll leave you a few to do. Okay, well, that's it for proofs. If you need some more help or need some further discussion, let me know.